Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that takes the southeast and the northwest corners of Eurasia and folds it over like a taco. You may notice from a slight chuckle there that we have two different voices on the podcast. Today you will have heard them before on a previous episode about Indonesian politics we did. So I'd like to introduce both Dan and Sage, who will be filling us in on how the Indonesian government has handled coronavirus, and I think we'll have a bit of chance to discuss the differences and the similarities between the UK approach and the Indonesian approach. So, yeah, I mean, maybe you want to start off by giving us an overview of kind of like the difference in statistics, because I don't think many British people have a good understanding of the difference in scale, because we're a relatively small country with like one big city in London, and I think maybe the layout over there is a bit different as well, because you have multiple islands and things like that. So maybe that would be a good place to start for people to understand and frame everything.
Sorry, I was going to start with like a rhetorical question. Dan, in your opinion, how has the Indonesian government's response been on a scale of 1 to 5?
I'd say about somewhere between 1 and 0.
Excellent.
Oh dear.
And we can sort of explore that as we go deeper into the podcast. But so the view from 60,000 feet is just we're a country. Our population is around 260 million people.
Yeah, I believe when we were looking at the World Bank statistics is 267, and that'll be important in a little bit because that's how we did our maths.
Yeah, we have 75,000 confirmed cases, and that's going up at the rate of about between 1,600 to 1,800 people a day. And we have 3,500 deaths. But those numbers are pretty iffy right now, which we'll go, deeper into as we go into the podcast.
Right. There's one of the, as a teaser, one of the main problems in Indonesia isn't just how the government is responding. It's how the government is responding to the data we have. And that problem with that is that our data collection methods are fairly poor in really getting the scope of the problem.
I mean, I think that's it's a problem everyone has been dealing with worldwide is testing and how we get data on people. But I think we're going to go now into more specifics, right? So how does your testing? I mean, are you testing, and if so, what methods are you using? Because I think there's some discussion about the different tests and what tests are good. Has been going around already, for us and for America. But it'd be interesting to see if are you doing the same swab test thing that people have to do here, or are you doing different tests?
Right. So to understand just how bad the situation is in Indonesia, I think you have to understand a lot of different things. One of the big aspects of what we believe is the big failure of government is indeed the testing system. But there are multiple aspects of the healthcare system that's failing right now. It's not just the testing. It's the bureaucracy behind it. It's the government, how the government sort of treats and how the health ministry behaves. There's also the economic impact that COVID is having on our country, but we'll go into that later on, I suppose. But just a quick teaser. We're one of those countries where the debate between keeping the economy alive and trying to lock everything down, it's a lot more real for us. I think it's just, you should understand that going forward. We're one of like an emerging country, which is fancy economists talk for a developing country, but sort of on the brink of maybe crossing over into a developed country with, less people in poverty, more people, more higher GDP, more economic growth. So a lot of the people in our country don't have access to very good healthcare. Not to also mention that they don't have a lot of income to begin with, not a lot of savings. So not being able to work for just 2 to 3 months, it's a pretty hard hit on us. But which is why both the people and the government is so very concerned, and also maybe there's a slight tinge of panic in the way they treat things, and also denial. So I'll just go into the testing right now. The problem with our testing system is twofold. One is with the way we test itself. And then the second problem is what we do with the data that we have. To begin with, we are one of the countries with the lowest statistics for testing, I think, in the world.
Yeah, I believe if I can find the data here, where our testing is at. We've just broke 1 million tests a few days ago, which is in July, out of 267 million people.
It's not very good. The rates. I believe this is from like early June, but I believe we're testing about only 2 people for every 1,000 people we have, which is horrible statistics for a country that's 250 million people. And the problem there is we had a lot of issues all the way since the beginning of getting the materials required to conduct, the swab test, the PCR test. You require a lot of reagents, basically to activate the genetic material and reproduce enough genetic material that you can test it. We didn't have enough of those. We also did not have very good infrastructure to distribute testing kits over a wide area. We are an island country, so I think we like to boast about this a lot because we're a big tourism country. We like to say there are 13,000 islands in our island chain. The number fluctuates, and it's always this is something we're always proud of, except when it comes to a crisis like this where we can't. It's very difficult, and even within the biggest islands, there's a lot of villages and everything, and it's very, very difficult to actually get from the cities where you'll probably be receiving these testing equipment and producing the testing equipments and getting them into the villages through jungle, through badly maintained roads. That's very, very difficult.
One of the biggest, up until a few years ago, and up until this administration, in fact, one of the only ways to get to just the eastern Java from here was to go up south and up through the mountains on a road built by the Dutch. When was Dendels? In 1850?
It was mid 1800s, and it was constantly renewed. But it's just like it's a 2-lane road, one going one direction, one going the other. It's not a highway. It's not optimized for like trucks or fast transport, and you're sharing it with around, I think, like something like 150 million people live on the island of Java. We're one of the most packed islands. So
it was one of the most population. I believe when I repeated these statistics in the last few episodes, it's the size of England, and it's 2.5 times the population of Great Britain in that space, and it's mountainous too. So everybody, it's cut off. We did build a toll road finally, but like. The fact of the matter is, anybody trying to head east, there's a joke that we say that the eastern suburb of Jakarta, Bekasi, is actually not on this planet. It's on a planet somewhere closer to the sun, because A, it's incredibly hot, and B, it takes hours to get in, get through, and get out. So you must clearly be passing through some other faraway point of the solar system to get here.
Yeah, it's on another planet, we always say. And I think that illustrates some of the problems we have regarding distribution infrastructure.
Sorry, can I just butt in slightly? I just wanted to say, as a kind of touchstone for British listeners, that maybe, so that is a lot of islands, and we don't have anything like that over here. But if we just think about in Scotland how hard it is to get stuff out to the islands out there, you have, I think it is the shortest plane flight in the world, like commercial plane flight in the world, is between 2 of the Scottish islands. And it has to be massively subsidised, because if that's like the only way for these people to get on and off that island reliably, it's like £20, I think, for a ticket, because it's the only way to do it. And those kind of problems times by like thousands of islands as opposed to like 10.
Exactly. Yeah. I think when I said 8,000, I think that's actually the number of inhabited islands, actually. But even between like the big islands, one of the other islands, which we call our part of it, Kalimantan, I don't think there's a road across the island. It's just dense rainforest and some mountains. And to get from the cities on the west to the cities on the east, you go by boat. You go by boat a long way around the island, because going north around the island is through Malaysian space.
Yeah, or like smaller like bush plains, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah, just patches of road. None of it's ever like really super interconnected, and that's been a problem with our country for a long, long time. And it's not something that's rearing its ugly head right now. It's been a problem we've realized for a long time. It's just we never had the money or the resources to actually, build roads across all of the country.
Right. The president has been his main initiative. I mean, his whole administration the past 6 years has been just to build as much infrastructure as he can, so that we can leave the country in a better place when he leaves the presidency. But there's just so much of it to cover. It's just one of those things where, like many other countries, like the US, like the UK, like the other countries that are struggling under this, it's not so much that the coronavirus is so horrifically ravaging across the country, which it is, but it's also that it's exposing the systemic issues, long-standing systemic issues with the country's bureaucracy and their handling of medical resources, of infrastructure, of just not having the money to deal with that, or for their where the priorities were, we can deal with infrastructure later. I want my political objectives now.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a point people can agree on worldwide, that politicians tend to think in short term, what will get me elected? What will I get done in 4 years? And that means larger scale projects. Our example would be like, helping out the NHS and shoring that up correctly. I mean, while it's been great to have the influx of cash during the coronavirus pandemic, it would be better to think in 10, 20-year kind of stages about how to shore all of that up, so that next time something like this happens, we're not left in a state where we can't react as well as we would like. Though that kind of story can be taken to any government anywhere in the world, and you can discuss like whether one country does it slightly worse or better than the other, but it's true everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's exposing terrible systemic problems everywhere. All countries are equal, but this country is more equal than the others. I do think ours is, as we'll state, whether or not it's we can tell how bad it is. Again, we have a data collection problem. We basically have a systemic get things done problem that is extended all the way back to colonial times and pre-colonial times. And getting into all of that, we could sit here for 4 hours and talk about all that, but we're going to try to cut it down for you.
I could say there's sort of a cultural issue with, how we like to get things done that kind of goes against of what you should be doing during a crisis like this. But I think it's better just to save that more for later, because I think it connects more once you have the context of everything that's going on. I'm going to move on to the second problem that we have with our testing is, I think, so as you listen to what we're about to tell you, the confusion that we're experiencing right now is that we know our country is handling the virus very, very badly. The problem has gotten pretty big. And right now, the difficulty we're having is trying to understand whether the failure of our policy and policymakers to handle this problem, whether it is systemic and a legacy of, our entire history of, corruption. We've had a dictatorship for almost 30 years. We've had, we were colonized before that for over 200 years. And then even before that, you can say there are like certain cultural issues that don't necessarily lend to people acting very, very quickly and pointing out when we have the problem. So that's one side of the issue. And then the other side of the issue is how much of it is actually deliberate. How much of it is the government looking at the problem, like looking at the cost and benefit analysis and saying, we would rather some people die so that we can get X, Y, and Z done. It's very difficult for us to see this right now. I think maybe in 6 months or a year, once we can see how each policy has turned out, we'll get a clearer picture. But basically, you'll be seeing this thread appear again and again, where one side of it is an issue we've been dealing with pre-COVID. Nothing would have been able to help these problems. But then you have the second type of problem, which is exasperated by COVID, and it is the government deliberately taking action that is not in the best interest of the people or in anyone's best interest. We just don't know what's going on in their head. So right now, I just said about not getting enough testing kits, infrastructure. That's a pre-COVID issue. The post-COVID issue, or the issue that's being that the government is deliberately doing right now, is the creation of COVID categories. So the WHO has anywhere you go in the news, you see the WHO categories for COVID and COVID testing, which is there are positive cases, there are cases that have recovered, and then there are deaths, right? So what happened in our country is the government looked at that and say, you know what we need is our own sort of testing regime. So instead of the 3 categories that you have, we're going to create 5 categories, 6 if you count the deceased. So you have deceased, obviously, but then you have people who are tested positive for COVID using a PCR test and have died. People who are patients who are alive and they have tested positive using the PCR test. And then there are those who have recovered. And then you have these additional cases like patients under supervision. These are patients who have had contact with cases, and then they are displaying acute COVID-19 symptoms, symptoms like SARS, the acute respiratory syndrome, or having pneumonia, things like that. And then on top of that, you have patients under suspicion. These are patients who do not have, they're not displaying symptoms of COVID-19, but they've traveled to areas and they've had contact with people who are sick. And so it's very confusing. There are like these 5 different categories. And the more you look into it, the more you see that these is sort of a deliberate attempt to obfuscate the number of cases. It's that logic, of 5 categories of 10,000 is less intimidating than a single category of 50,000. So I think up until late March, I think up until the middle of April, you didn't even know about the patients under supervision and patients under suspicion. It was just the government was saying, oh, we have 8,000 positive cases back in April. And a lot of people were, raising a lot of doubt against that. Like, we're a big country, very, very dense population where these cases are appearing. We must have more than 8,000 cases. And after a while, they admitted, like, yes, technically we have more cases, but we can't be sure. They could totally be healthy. It could be some other disease. And so they finally disclosed these. But
I believe you were saying that when the WHO has cases that, we don't have the test back, but they have acute COVID-19 related looking symptoms, we just count it as a case because despite the ambiguity, it's almost probably that, and we shouldn't fake the data. Indonesia's like, we can't be sure. We can't be sure. Don't count it.
Yeah, it's this attitude of the government where, like, we got this, just calm down, which is
everything's in hand. Don't worry about it. Yeah,
everything's in hand. Yeah, and I think it's just this deliberate dishonesty that is shaking our sort of our faith in, like, are you really taking this seriously? This is it gets even worse, where they found this caveat in which if you are a patient suffering from acute COVID-19 symptoms but have not yet been tested with the PCR,
or the test hasn't come back yet,
or the test hasn't come back yet, and then you die, you are not counted as a COVID-19 patient. You died either of acute respiratory failure, of pneumonia, or whatever it is that the local hospital is forced to list it as, because the test has not come back in yet. So when I say we have 3,500 deaths, ABC Australia and Tempo, which is a very reputable local magazine, they did their own research based on the WHO standards. They found that the number of people who have died suffering from COVID is probably closer to 10,000 now.
Yeah,
or 12.
It's just 3 times the actual number.
Yeah, it's even harder to estimate that just because the data flowing in is so incomplete. And yeah, so the government is willfully doing this. And so in our history, government upheavals in government, as in like regimes falling or any sort of massive political upheaval, is always preceded by social unrest. You see this in 1965, 1997, and a couple of times last year, actually, when there's a lot of social unrest, the government is paranoid that they would lose their power and then they would back down. So I think right now they're doing everything that they can to keep social cohesion at a maximum. And they're doing this by propagating perhaps not outright lies, because, you're getting into very, very difficult, semantics there, but like they're being dishonest, or they're like, at least they're obscuring the truth. This is also true, back in January and February, when a lot of analysts were saying there's probably COVID cases, but then everyone in the government, but especially people from the health ministry was, don't worry, everything's fine. They were like, they began spouting these nonsense.
No, but we actually had to have the health minister taken off of the daily briefings because this was early in March, I believe. Yeah. Like that early on, because he kept saying things like, what did you tell me?
So it first began with people of Malayan descent. Malay people, we can't catch COVID, which is ridiculous. Malaysia has one of the highest cases now, and people all over Sumatra who are ethnically Malay, there are cases all over now. And then he said something like, it wasn't him, but the president, Jokowi, said, traditional Indonesian medicine, which is basically like leaves and fruit that are, distilled. They're usually like tonics, like nutrition.
Important cultural heritage, but not
life-saving.
Not life-saving.
Yeah. And then I think his biggest fumble was when he said, are you sure that there are no cases? Yes. And then the health minister, his name is Terawan Agus Purtanto, just Terawan or health minister from now on. He said, yes, we are working very hard in the health ministry. You have nothing to fear. We're probably being protected because we're hard workers and because we pray a lot.
Clearly, we stopped praying because the COVID cases started rolling in almost immediately after.
Yeah, not enough prayer. There was a lot of, and then he was, that sort of was a big fiasco. He was lambasted by the media and by social media, like prayer. What are you talking about? We are a fairly religious country, but I think even a lot of the population was able to see through his bullshit. And after that, he was no longer in charge of the daily press briefings. He was replaced with another health official, but that's sort of just the government trying to cover up. And yeah, that's the testing side of things.
To add on, we were starting off with something that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but despite what we're sure and what outside research is sure, we have 3 times the number of deaths, we probably have a ton more cases than this. We're already the highest case count in Southeast Asia, ahead of Singapore and the Philippines. And so if they're trying to cover up and prevent panic, the case numbers are already showing that we're still in deep trouble.
There are definitely issues with governments elsewhere not, hiding figures. We've had the big problem in the UK about them double counting the tests to say more people were tested and stuff. And also, there has been dispute about what the official figures are, because for a long time they didn't include deaths outside of hospitals. And because of the way COVID works, you can have people get COVID and die of an existing condition and COVID together, and they may not have been tested for COVID. So there's definitely similar problems here, but it seems like maybe not quite on the same scale.
I think, just to back up Sage's point just now, it does sound very conspiratorial, but where I work, we were able to interview someone who comes from, it's called the Eichmann Institute. It's one of the largest institutes for microbiology, and so we spoke to some of the leading scientists there and a leading scientist at another university, and they did back up these claims, and they were, in fact, government funded. So if someone who is on the government's payroll is willing to say, we're not doing the government's not doing a great job, I think there's a lot of truth in there. Not to also mention, of course, they were experts.
So yeah, just moving on to the next point. How is the government sort of distributing resources to help handle the pressure?
Would you say on a scale of 1 to 5, it's back to 0 and 1 again?
Yeah, I would just not use 5 to 10 just because we're just in general it's bad. I don't want to have to do this in every section, but yeah.
Basically, it's bad all around. But I believe the problem is we've mentioned the infrastructure problems in getting everything to every island and getting resources to even inter-island to other places, just from say the capital in Jakarta to the other parts of Western Java is a pain. But there's also a problem with tensions between the federal response and the regional response, which power is very much centralized in the federal government. It's one of the things we mentioned earlier, that the federal government especially is paranoid. One, social unrest will destabilize their power, but also two, that giving more autonomy to the regional governments will also destabilize their power, and that has quite messed up the coronavirus response individually in regions.
Yeah, so we were founded as a unitary republic, and throughout our history, that has served a lot of the Jakartan elite, the capital city elite. We had a dictatorship for 30 years, and nothing went on in any part of the country without a say-so. So when he was toppled in the 1990s...
Which is, we've had a dictatorship for 30 years, and it hasn't been 30 years again. Like, we haven't had time really to unwind all that he did.
Yeah, we tried to roll back those, the power of the central government. What we did was we created a lot of rules and regulations that allowed for regional autonomy. So, however, there is still a lot of tension between the people in the capital, or on the island of Java, but mostly in the capital, Jakarta. They believe that regional autonomy will either weaken their political power, but also there's the belief that through more regional autonomy, our country, which is very, very vast, with lots of languages and cultures and people groups, will sort of slowly pull apart and fall apart into, this nation as an experiment will fail. I think they don't want that. But on the other hand, the regional autonomy are tired of having to need the say-so of the government on every single thing before they can actually do anything. So we're in this space right now where there's still a lot of central power, but a lot of regional slowly being peeled back, and the regional areas are starting to have more autonomy. So how does this relate to like getting the equipment and like how health work is happening throughout our country is it's not coordinated very, very well, because the central government and to a certain extent the health ministry has its own way of doing things. However, in each different region and each different province, they do have their own way of doing things. This is really difficult, especially when you want to deal with data for how do we centralize how many patients there are, how many doctors there are, how much equipment do they need, how much funding do they need. Everyone has their own system of keeping the books. Everyone has their own system of strategies for how to deal with certain disease, or at least how to deal with COVID, and how to source different equipment and different money. So between what the health ministry wants to do and between what each region wants to do, there are not only multiple layers of bureaucracy, but different bureaucracy according to which region. And that has slowed down immensely. A lot of critics of the government would say you need to let go and let the regional governments have more latitude to act and to have what they want and to do their own method for what works. But insofar, the central government is still very, very paranoid. It's still very, very, it wishes to hang on to this, power of the unitary government. But in each province, they can't perform to the max. A big example of this would be, so we don't have a nationwide lockdown, but we have what's called the social restrictions, which is sort of like halfway lockdown procedures where you stay at home and you're not allowed to be out unless you have a certain permit, and the permit comes from the place that you work. So it just sort of limits as much people going out as possible. However, in order to enact this, each region has to first submit a document that says, I have a certain number of deaths, and that will be reviewed by the health ministry, and then the health ministry can then approve and give the approval to the mayor or the governor of the area to say, yes, you may enact lockdown now. So this has been very, very dangerous because it's a very reactive measure instead of being preventive. So it only once you have exceeded a certain amount of deaths and the virus has spread very, very badly, do you actually have the permission to enact the lockdown that would have, prevented it in the first place. You have, it was in the news, and they sort of made a big deal of it, but one mayor saw that his the cases in his city were growing rapidly. This is the city of Tegal. It's in central Java. He saw cases exploding in his city and decided to enact lockdown. And so the main sources of transportation, which is ships and buses, were closed. They had checkpoints all throughout the city to make sure just like segment the city up into little sectors and prevent contact. However, the central government sort of saw this as a challenge, and then after about several days, they told him to roll back those same measures. They sort of like publicly condemned him that you do not have the authority to act this way. Open your city back up, and he was forced to. Although he was able to, weave his way around the regulations, and he could lock off at least the public areas like parks and like these street markets where people would be hanging around each other. And then he had, social distancing is a thing, mask is a thing, but the lockdown was lifted pretty soon after that. That's just like one anecdote, but it's the same about everywhere you go. The same also applies to like hospitals, I think. Their record keeping, the way they store up data, and their procedures for how to handle patients is different. And we're talking about one hospital having computers, one hospital having, Windows 2000, and then another hospital still dealing with patient data on physical documents, pen and paper being stored in archives. And so when there's no quick way of being able to like, what do you need? Let me get it to you. There's no standardization, which is, I think that's forgivable, because I think anywhere you look in in any country, there's going to be issues with standardization. The bigger the country that you have, but I think it is this reluctance of the government to hand over the authority for the local governments to act that is kind of starting to hurt the country really badly, and it is not something that they necessarily have to do.
If I may speculate, and this might actually get back to the conspiracy part of the thing, is if the government's plan is to reduce panic as much as possible, to make sure that there isn't as much social unrest as possible, if one governor is going, oh, we're not having a lockdown, and the governor next door is going, okay, everything's locked down, nobody's allowed to move unless you're going in, unless you're sure you haven't had any contact with this person, unless you had contact tracing, unless this, and the people of the government seeing all of this heavy responses like, okay, they're panicking, should we be panicking? Yeah. So it's very much that the central government, I think, really wants to control this narrative because they want as little panic and as little social unrest as possible. And in the opinion of both of us, I think is as much as they want to avoid it, it's if they keep letting it run like this, and it's heading straight towards that sort of high level of social unrest. We disagree on how that's going to manifest, though.
It's interesting when you compare over to the UK and the US that thinking about it, I suppose this has made me think about something we've seen in America where you've had the different governors of different states making different decisions. But and again, like Trump coming out and criticizing them. And it's interesting because generally the position of the kind of conservative voices in both the US and the UK is that centralized government is not the best thing, and we should localize things a bit more and stop big government spending. But when faced with a crisis like this, as you say, the central government wants to control the narrative more, and you then end up in this kind of interesting flip of what that traditional kind of conservative stance is.
So where I work, my boss is American, and he keeps tabs on a lot. Where I work is I work at a political risk consultancy, but we also do podcasts, so it's weird.
Indonesia in depth. Download it wherever you get podcasts.
Yeah, but basically he's seen Indonesian politics for a long time. He's worked there, I think, almost 20 years. And he's seen a lot of parallels between the way the problems that Indonesia are faced with, lack of testing, denial of testing, similar to what the CDC tried to do in the United States, where they wanted their own way of testing, and then they have their own way of regulating drugs and testing and like cases, and that's actually getting in the way of how each different state is dealing with a problem because they're trying to standardize something when it's a vastly different country with different populations, different geographies, different budgets. And so that gets in the way. I think the one difference is that our central government they haven't done it, but they have waived the idea quite seriously that if this sort of behavior continues of, not listening to the central government, they're willing to charge the people doing that with treason. Same thing applies for people who are trying to criticize the government on social media during these times. They would be charged with treason, and that's actually that's had a chilling effect. I think the minimum sentence is 3 years, the maximum sentence is 10 if you criticize the government. And so you also see this massively securitized response where the police and the military are stepping in, and they're also using the criminal justice system to enact a lot of these lockdown measures and also enact a lot of the laws around the lockdown measures, things like criticizing the government, or like things like governors or mayors trying to take their own approach. So I think that's the biggest thing that we found troubling with the way the government behaves right now, and the way how they treat people trying to help with the pandemic. I think that's about it for. Sorry, Rob, did that answer your question, or you want something a little bit more detailed?
No, that's very detailed indeed.
I feared I might have meandered around a little bit because there's a lot to unpack, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we started to stray a little into the situational factors there as well, talking about this friction between central and regional government. But I mean, it's all interesting, and as with most things, it defies simplicity. You can't present the full story without touching on elements from elsewhere.
Explain COVID is a wide question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, do you want to move on to the economy bit?
Oh God, the economy.
That's the trailer for this episode. Just, oh God, the economy.
As Bill Clinton once said, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, here in the UK, we are, we've had this great push and pull, as you've already mentioned, between the need to save lives and then the massive effect that COVID-19 has had on the economy. What sort of pressures are you suffering in a developing economy that's one that's very different to ours over here in the UK?
I could start with the stats if you want. So let's start with the national poverty line. We don't count wages by hourly wages. We count it by monthly wages. The national poverty line, not even comparing it to like World Bank's poverty line, which is $2 a day, I believe. Ours is £23.40 a month per person. Which I believe divided by 30 is something like 78 pence a day. Something around that. It's a minuscule amount a day, and imagine, for example, you have a family of 5 and 2 working incomes, 3 if the one of the children's old enough.
We have child labor laws, but at the same time, I think a lot of people are kind of flexible, knowing that people live in poverty, money. So children age 14 can start earning income and going to shops or as construction workers.
The ridiculous thing is I think that was actually raising the poverty line from 300,000 rupiah to 400,000 rupiah, so something like 18 pounds to 23 pounds. I don't remember exactly, but and it's still I want to say 25 million people below the national poverty line. And that is at 9.4% of the population is the lowest the poverty level's been ever.
So historically, these are the lowest poverty numbers we've ever had. It's been going down since 1999. We've been pretty successful at it, but we'll see like a massive spike this year. So a lot of the people are they can't afford to go on without food, without income. I think I should also point out that in addition to the 9% of the population living below the poverty line, 55% of the population are living in informal sectors. So they're everything from street vendors to motorcycle taxi drivers. They have income and they have savings, but you can't expect their savings to last more than maybe 2 to 3 months. And 55% of the population is, I think, almost 150 million people, I think. or at least 120 million people. So there's this immense burden on the government to have to provide for these people who are within 2 to 3 months, their savings are going to be wiped out, and we're going to have a serious problem. I think as far back as April, we've already had reports of people who are starving to death due to loss of income and not being able to eat. And this is obviously all very, very horrible. We have, I think, a lot of the businesses in our country are also small to medium enterprises. So these are everything from mom to pop shops, but also maybe people who are like have online stores. Online vendors. They don't own the online stores, but like they're online vendors. They own restaurants, barbershops, and so a lot of the weight on the government has been to how do we move enough of our money and our government expenditure to be able to provide for these people.
Can I quickly ask, was there some sort of safety net before COVID for people in this environment, or not? Is this another thing that COVID sort of highlighted and said, oh my goodness, we should provide a safety net for these people who are in extreme poverty? Or did something exist and it's just putting even more pressure on an already existing system?
Yeah, we do have an existing system. We provide about, the numbers are tricky to get at here. So it's 10 million households. It doesn't say like how much we're spending per capita, but for 10 million households, we're willing to provide basically food coupons and money for schools and supplies. And more money gets added onto that if you have more dependents, children, or people over the retirement age. So we have a system that's set up, but it's not a very, very good system to begin with, because 10 million households is not a lot of people when you think about it. And so far, the criticism is that ever since COVID hit, we haven't actually tried to raise this number from beyond 10 million households, even though we know that there are going to be way more than 10 million households. The government has not moved the number on that. For the reasons for why they haven't moved that are beyond anyone right now, but that's one of the criticisms. So I think the stresses that's being additionally put on by COVID is distributing the money. So we have like a COVID, like a care package, we just call it the COVID budget, which is 170 trillion rupiah. How much is that in pounds?
I want to say, hang on, I didn't keep the numbers. I want to say it's about 9 billion pounds.
Yeah, around 9 billion pounds. This is for maybe, we're not sure, but at least 10 million people, probably more, but probably closer to 20 or 30 million people, because that's one of the projections that the government has, that if things continue on their current course, and they're not continuing their current course, in fact getting worse, but at the end of this, we might have closer to 30 million 30 million living in the poverty and the extremely vulnerable poverty category of people. Again, I'm gonna go back to this, the situational problems of the regional and central tension. Each region has their own data keeping methods. So a lot of people who live in these areas aren't getting the aid that they need because the government is sending money based on data that is inaccurate or data that it's misrepresenting. A bunch of these regions have not even sent their data back yet. It was in the news, I think as early as May, or April, where the government is saying, the reason we're not handing out as much money is because the regions aren't saying how many people they actually have. And so I think around 25% of the people who are eligible for social handouts hasn't actually collected it. Sometimes the money, because the data is so incomplete, sometimes the money that it's being allocated to a certain region is not also used very well. For example, one sector was dealing with very, very heavy COVID hits. I can't remember where, but they had a lot of COVID cases, and instead of the money being allocated directly into food coupons, which was things being done in other areas, they were being given cash handouts. And this ends up with people going to the bank and standing for hours in line because the bank was overloaded and then they didn't have enough cash on hand. And that was causing more and more COVID cases to spread through that vector. And so I think a lot of these little things that just add up and slowly like bring the entire country crashing down, unfortunately. That's the approach that they've taken for for the people who are living in the either below the poverty line or close to it.
Right, the marginal people.
Yeah, I think for the small and medium enterprises, they also have a big fraction of the money being allocated in the COVID budget actually goes to these small and medium enterprises. I think in 2017, the data was that small and medium enterprises, SMEs, make up about 99% of all businesses in Indonesia in terms of quantity, not in terms of income. In terms of income, or rather in terms of GDP, it's about 27%. But that also means that if you look at the fractions, most of the people are not earning that much, and therefore they're more liable to closing down their business once if something like prolonged lockdown happens. I think that's one of the main reasons the government is so so reluctant to enact full lockdowns. It's also so eager to enact this the new normal, they call it, which is the we're reopening the country. I think it's just because we realize that these businesses cannot survive. We're already seeing at least 37,000 businesses apply for assistance, and the assistance is in the form of loan relaxations, a 6 month tax waiver, and cash transfers for these small businesses. 200 trillion rupiah is being allocated to that.
I would like to guess about 11 billion pounds.
I don't want to say bright side because this is not really a bright side, but I think there are a lot of small and medium enterprises that are currently surviving because they're actually in the textile and plastics sector, and they've actually been able to help supply personal protective equipment for hospitals, and the government is also pushing very, very hard to start exporting PPEs. Obviously, there's a lot of problems regarding like a lot of trade moratoriums and restrictions and that are going on right now, just because the whole global economy is sort of like
stuttering to a halt.
Yeah, starting to a halt. But that's one side of our economy that's currently keeping up. I suppose that's good, even though I don't know if I call that a bright side to all this. So the country has infamously relied upon foreign capital flowing in, and that has been a major crutch for our country for years, and we've been trying all sorts of different ways. In fact, Jokowi, the current president, one of the biggest promises he's had is actually he was trying to get us to move past for foreign capital inflow, but stage one of that plan is actually to invite as much foreign capital into the country as possible. It's just the moment we tried to do that, the COVID virus.
The problem was we were trying to build up the country with these great big infrastructure projects. I've mentioned Kalimantan earlier in the podcast. We were trying to move our capital city to a new planned city in the southeast of Kalimantan, which has its own problems, like cutting down the rainforest. But we were invited. We took on a lot of debt to start these infrastructure projects. His term started just last October. He was getting everything going, and then COVID-19 sort of came in like a wrecking ball.
Yeah, I think we can explore that a little bit more later. But it is true. I think that's the tragedy of it all, is that our nation was on a very optimistic direction, and then the COVID hit, and it's sort of like took away everything that we've been trying to. I think recently I forgot, was it the WTO, or it moved us from developing economy to developed economy, just because we were forecasting I think 5.5% economic growth by the end of 2020, which is pretty substantial. And it was super optimistic, and then this hit. And so right now, everywhere around the world, no one is willing to lend money. Everyone's sort of clutching their pearls, and so no cash is currently flowing in. Same thing with foreign aid. I think a lot of aid from the IMF is also, they've agreed, I think, during the G20, which happened a while back, but they agreed that not to give cash handouts, or like not to rely too much on foreign aid. And so we're really not in a good place. We're in a place where we also can't afford to print a lot of money, because unlike the dollar, our currency is not traded worldwide. So it's more likely to hit an inflation either now or when the COVID crisis ends and people start buying up more stuff and too much money flows into the economy all at once. What we've been trying to do to raise money to pay for everyone and all of the, the health expenditure, and then all these tax breaks for businesses, and all these basically social assistances, we've been selling a lot of government bonds. This is also the first time, I think, in our history where our central bank would buy up government bonds that our Ministry of Finance is issuing, just so that the government technically has enough money to keep the crisis going. We could also take a lot of loans. I think we've already taken, I can't remember the number, but we've already recently taken a loan from the United States to also help pay for a lot of the expenditure that's going to come for the next 2 years. But everyone realizes that we cannot keep this up, especially when you see that this is not just going to be, we're going to have COVID for the next 18 months, is all going to be done. There's going to be this a paradigm change in the way people act, in the way people think, in the way that the economy works, in the way that people invest, in the way that venture capitalists, for example, or banks evaluate whether or not to give countries or businesses in our country loans is going to change. And I think that's the big dilemma that the government has to face now, and we're not doing a very, very good job trying to evaluate what to do, just because there's so many unknown factors, and we have a lot of debt tied up. We don't have a high debt to GDP ratio, but we rely on a lot of foreign capital to come in to finance whatever we're doing, and then we can carry on, which is very, very bad during a time where globally everyone's just shuttering down. We should also point out that we also have a lot of projects. One of the ways that Joko was trying to build our country was through infrastructure projects. These are usually hydroelectric dams, especially for areas outside of Java that have intermittent power, bridges, train lines, and one high-speed rail project. We have a lot of projects signed up with China, and China right now is it's sort of basically everyone around the world is sort of casting a lot of doubt about how China is doing.
Sorry, is this tying into kind of the is it Belt and Road initiative, where they've been giving a lot of money to various countries to kind of help improve their infrastructure and stuff like that?
Yeah, that would be true. I think what's happening right now is, so there are different ways we can speculate about this. The optimistic speculation is that while the United States is still suffering from a lot of COVID and their economy is slowing down, China will be more proactive, and basically they will try to be more economically involved with a lot of countries around the world. The pessimistic outlook is that the Chinese economy is slowing down. I mean, it has been slowing down for the past decade and a half, I think. The China growth is not a myth, but is not always true. And we have seen economic slowdowns as early as 2014, I think. And we fear that this is going to grind the Chinese economy to a halt, and it would be a while before they pick up their momentum again. And the bad thing about that is, in either case, I think there are investments and projects more important to China than Indonesia, because we are not a particularly strategic country geographically or politically. We also have had a history of, we're not exactly on good terms with the Chinese government. One, because we have a history of discrimination and hatred of Chinese nationals, but also of ethnic Chinese citizens living in Indonesia. The second part is that we also have had diplomatics, like little tussles here and there, especially in the beginning of this year when their Coast Guard ships wandered, I think, into our waters, not our territorial waters, but into our economic, I can't remember, but our EEZs. Since January, the relationship's gone a little bit cold. We're also pretty early on. We had a travel ban for Chinese citizens, which they didn't take very well, because a lot of their citizens were in our country helping build infrastructure, and now they're stuck. They have travel restrictions, travel bans on them.
Exclusive economic zone. This is an extension of the South China Sea fight, I believe, over the things like the Natuna Islands and the Spratly Islands.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. So, yeah. So we're not going to go into that, but basically, I could spend another 2 hours on that. But
just to touch on it, discrimination against Chinese Indonesians, ethnic Chinese citizens. We mentioned 1965 and 98 or 97 and 98 as in social upheavals. They were also opportunities for discrimination and almost, I think, or up to actual pogroms against Chinese Indonesians. Nobody is happy with Indonesia's treatment of the Chinese Indonesians, and nobody is happy to see anything like that social unrest come back, which is fair. It was quite traumatizing, I think, for the nation.
I believe so, and I think this is something that the virus has also exacerbated. I'm not big on this analogy, but I think this is a pretty good analogy, at least to help understand the basics of how the experience of the Chinese people in Indonesia, but in Southeast Asia in general, is similar, I believe, to how the Jewish people were treated in Europe throughout the last 200 years, where they're seen as outsiders, but they're also seen as successful outsiders. They were captains of industry. Chinese Indonesians were in charge of very large banks. They were big businessmen. They had a lot of ties with people in power. Back then, it was the Dutch. Today, it's a lot of the people in government right now. So there is a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of inherent hatred by the, I say indigenous population, but I think we are such a diverse nation that the idea of an indigenous population, I think, is moot. But it is, I think, because at least appearance-wise, it's very, very, it's easily identifiable, the Chinese Indonesian versus other types of Indonesian ethnicities. So there have long been a target of, you're the tax collector. You're like, I owe debt to you. I don't like you. What has happened is there's a virus from Wuhan. Not to mention also, there was a lot of like fire-breathing rhetoric on some of the far right in Indonesia, saying that they invented this as a biological weapon to wipe out Muslims. This also the virus spikes also happened around the same time that Ramadan was going on, and at the end of Ramadan, you also have Lebaran, which is the Eid celebration, where you go back to your families, and massive migrations from urban areas into rural areas, which is very, very bad for COVID. And so the government put a ban to travel during that time just to limit the cases. And a lot of the rhetoric was like, this is like either that Joko hates Muslims, or that the Chinese people are, out of their hatred for Muslims, are trying to get in the way of Muslim traditions and the like. Not to mention they're trying to steal our islands, going back to what happened in January. So it is also compounding a big racial issue here.
Two additions. Because you might get letters about this, Tom. It was not the last 200 years. There's been Jewish persecution as early as 1144.
Yeah, no. It was definitely an ongoing problem for a long time.
The other thing I would like to add is Ramadan isn't just a big holiday for all that migration. It isn't just a big holiday. It isn't just a big pressure release on it's also a great economic event. Like the US and the UK has the Christmas shopping season. Christmas shopping season is not nearly so big despite our attempts at commercialization. Really, the Ramadan shopping season is the economic event of the year. It's where most businesses make their money back, I think, especially in food, especially in travel. And like in travel, the other place is the Hajj, which is about a month or two later. I think it should have been happening now, but that's also canceled.
Yeah, but I think the Hajj is also a lot of money flowing outwards, especially towards Saudi Arabia. This is more of the internal economic activity. A friend of mine described it to me as, think of Thanksgiving and Christmas rolled up into one. That's Lebaran, that's Eid.
It's about the same amount of time, actually. It's a month between Thanksgiving. And it's like, you think of a fasting month and it's like, oh, people aren't buying so much. But no, everybody's having like mini feasts when the fast breaks every day. Yeah. And so you're buying a lot more food, you're buying a lot more presents.
People are breaking fast together in restaurants, in public, celebrating together.
It's also when the yearly bonuses come down, or one of the yearly bonuses comes down. So like they have a lot more cash to spend for when they're traveling or just after Lebaran starts. And while the yearly bonuses by law have to come down at least in some industries,
I don't think they have to. Yeah, so I think realizing the pressure, Joko moved the national holidays and then the cash bonuses to the end of the year, to December, because one, we can't travel anyways, and two, it's a strain on businesses who are already having to fire a lot of people. He touched on a point there, Sage, about travel. Indonesia, one of our biggest sectors of industry, is tourism. We're a tropical island nation. You've all probably at some point in your life heard of Bali. I see that all the time in movies, actually, where like they think Bali is a state. It's not. It's always very, very funny when Indonesians see that in TVs. Like, the tourism industry is taking a huge hit right now. It's incredible. I think in Bali alone, I think there's a drop. There's a 60% drop in visitors. Usually about 60% of a hotel, lodging, and housing in the island is full with tourists year round. Now it's down to, I believe, 2%. There's nobody there. And these people is it's one of these industries that we really, really have come to rely upon. And COVID has just, came around the corner and hit us with a bat and continues to hit us. I think also this is an ironic thing. Back in March, when the coronavirus was serious, but the public perception of it wasn't quite as serious, Jokowi was spending massive amounts of money to invite and to pay for influencers to come to Indonesia for tourism in March, when there were about 80,000 cases worldwide. And at the same time, this is when the Vietnamese government were paying influencers domestically in their country to push out messages of that stay at home, masks are cool, you wear masks, wash your hands. But instead, the Indonesian government was spending, I don't remember the amount, maybe Sage can look it up, but massive amounts of money to invite influencers and say like, hey, visit Indonesia, it's cool, it's tropical, get a tan, surf, that sort of message on a loop. And they stopped not long after that, but that's just maybe can paint a picture of how afraid we are of losing the tourism sector. Like I said previously, COVID seems to be hitting us in not just in the worst time possible, but in all of the sectors which Indonesia has come to rely upon. I believe, or at least I hope, that this will be a wake-up call, not just for the government at large, but also the people in Indonesia in general, to sort of start to think about diversifying our economy.
Or investing in like the stuff that we do have but has so far been neglected. Like we were discussing as a tangent, like the academia in Indonesia is this is a tangent. You can cut this out if it turns out to be too much of a tangent. But you were saying that a lot of our statistics are coming from things like the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, the Australian National University, things conducted from outside of Indonesia looking in, as opposed to things we're doing ourselves. But the way that the academia is structured here is that it's not independent at all. It's sort of, it functions as a tool of policy. There's no system of where the academics can investigate government policy and call it out if necessary. Because the 30 years under the dictator was one of the things was a heavy system of repression, of sudden disappearances, of political prisoners being sent to an island, one of the many islands off in the archipelago where you couldn't possibly swim to any sort of mainland, where that culture still persists of keep your head down, don't do any whistleblowing, and frankly, that has stunted us. I think that attitude of sweeping things under the rug, that attitude of not allowing independent research, that attitude of do as we say and you'll be fine and you won't have to worry about your job security, and just keep your head down.
I managed to make this observation. I spent some time about a year back chaperoning, not really chaperoning, but I was assisting a project, a cultural exchange. So it was an exchange program where some Americans and Canadians would come over. And I think it is this notion of being more outright with our opinions and our thoughts is not something that we like to do here culturally, versus something in the West. Again, I'm making massive generalizations here, but I think I am starting to see these where we don't want to rock the boat. Nobody wants to rock the boat, and I think there's also a heavy stigma on people who do. I think similarly to the way the Japanese people sort of see social cohesion as one of the pillars of society, and we cannot, going against the grain is very, very difficult, and it's often stigmatized as disrespectful, selfish, basically prioritizing oneself against the opinions of the whole has made it very, very difficult for critics to sort of stand up and say, either just say to the government, you're not doing this wrong and you should take these different approaches, or even to just say that things are not going very, very well. I think a lot of observers of Indonesia, and ourselves included, have noticed that government seems to be in denial. And I don't fault them for being in denial. I think what we said previously, it's just hit at the wrong time. We have had dreams of becoming a developed nation for so long.
Since the beginning, since 1945.
Yeah, and and then the current government this is his second term, and he's spent his last term sort of preparing the foundation for basically Indonesia's jumping off point and Indonesia's jumping off moment, building infrastructure, trying to increase human resources, and he's done that with mixed success, obviously. But I think Jokowi and the people in his administration see COVID not only as a threat to the people and the government, but also a threat to their legacy, because everything that they have worked for up until this point has, they see it as, if I don't handle this the way I'm currently handling this, everything will be moot. I would say that it's moot already, and that's the tragedy of it. It's incredibly sad, and I wish it were different, but we don't have any other choice. We can't, those are the cards that were dealt to us. But I think the government are still within this denial stage where they believe that if we persist in a certain way long enough, we will be able to salvage this and get back to the programs we initially thought. That's deeply rooted in, I think, wanting to leave a legacy, because Indonesian people we don't have a very, very long-term political memory. We seem to just take bits and pieces. We've had 6 presidents so far, but 7?
7, yes.
Sorry.
Quick tangent. Sukarno, Suharto, Habibie, Gus Dur, Megawati, SBY, Jokowi.
Oh, sorry, 7. I was wrong. not a very good Indonesian. I'm sorry. But yeah, if you ask the average Indonesian, I think it would be very, very difficult for them to point out different changes in different policies that have been enacted under different presidents. because they tend to forget what they cannot immediately feel. And I think that sort of mindset has also influenced the government, in which they want, there's a lot of pomp and theater in what they do, just because they're afraid of being forgotten just being forgotten from societal memory. And he was that president from 2000 something to 2000 something, and he did a bunch of stuff.
You forgot we had 7 presidents, for goodness sake. So
I think that's one big fear that they have. But also, I think the second big fear is the thing that I talked about previously, where it's like we were on the track for something that could have been very, very.
We were trying to come down from optimistic to straight to, oh my God, this is, well, not apocalyptic, but this is one of the worst case scenarios economically, is a very difficult transition to make. And that it's very human. I don't know if I can forgive them for it, but it's very human and understandable that they're just, well, we could in fact let everything crash down, or we could pump the brakes as much as we can without letting everything crash down. And I think it's just slowing down the crashing down. It's not going to prevent it.
Yeah, there's also a lot of rent-seeking practices in the government right now, and this sort of manifests in like the big projects that we have lined up for the next 5 years. Big infrastructure projects that a lot of local governments can rely upon for income and jobs. Similar to the way it's so difficult to cancel like the F-35 in America because it's tied up to everything. Our infrastructure projects are the same. The roads, the bridges, the hydroelectric dams, and even the huge plan to build the capital. Something that Masayoshi Son, the investor for SoftBank, who invested in like Oyo and WeWork, I think he pledged, initially he was going to pledge $100 billion, but now it's down to $20 billion to build the new capital, to build the city and to fund different infrastructures like ride sharing and building hotels and financial districts. All these contracts were probably either being lined up or had already lined up. And for a lot of people in the government and the parliament who are closely tied to these projects, they don't want to see these projects go away too. And I think the tragic thing is they've seen the cost-benefit analysis, whether between giving up these projects to save the lives of Indonesians or to hold on to these projects and to the potential growth and profit that they will bring. And I think they've just decided to favor profits of themselves, or maybe not just selfishly themselves, but their districts and their particular region and their particular people. And so there are a lot of constraints holding back sort of large sweeping change that a crisis like COVID needs.
The thing is, as we've been saying, like there's a great deal of structural problems. The cost benefit analysis of are we ready to handle this if we stop everything is, well, either we stop everything and we have a recession and lots of people die because we're not ready to handle this, or we try to keep the projects going, lots of people die, we have a recession anyway. And the more palatable option, because we simply weren't equipped for this, is just try to soldier on. Unfortunately. Like, as much as it's irresponsible, the outcomes are so bad either way that the difference is basically statistics.
I was trying to think of a nice way to end my explanation the other day, but I think what I ended up after discussing with some friends and some my experts who are friends, I think that, and this comes back to the point of why maybe we're hiding a lot of our data for how many cases, how many people exactly died. I think the really tragic, the worst possible scenario we could come out of this as a country is that we forget about this. That in say 3 to 5 years, because we had so little data and because we were so focused on trying to stay on this path to greatness, this delusion of grandeur that we have, maybe is not entirely a delusion, but because we so tightly cling to this, we look at this back in 5 years and say, it wasn't so bad, and we forget just the gravity of the situation, the the need for sweeping bureaucratic change everywhere, not to just focus on trying to jump as far as possible, but to actually, build a bridge so that we actually have like a falling back point. I think me and Sage was talking about this yesterday. It's been the attitude of Indonesians since the independence to sort of build it and they will come. Let's build a nation and there will be people to fill it somehow.
Basically, the UK is 1,000 years of precedent. The US has an entire constitution of like several pages and 24 articles, and we have 5 principles, and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
As a national story of like, here's the bedrock, and we'll build something on top as we go.
I think this pride we have in the founding fathers sort of trickled down to trying to do things the way they did things, and the way they did things was, the preambles for our Constitution were thought up in like a matter of days, and even there are anecdotes when our president made the first speech declaring our independence, he had changed some of his script and some of his preambles and of our 1945 Constitution on the spot. A bunch of people in the crowd were like, "This is not what we written yesterday," which I don't know how true that is, but that's been recorded in different, memoirs of our founding fathers. The same thing applies for building institutions, where we didn't have much of an economy back then, but we had a Ministry of Economy. We didn't have much of a finance, but we decided to build a big finance ministry, and we didn't have a military really. We just had a bunch of guerrilla fighters who spent the last 8 years fighting the Dutch. But let's have a grand armed forces of Indonesia. How are we going to do it? As long as we have the name and the institution, people will come. So it's kind of this, not necessarily setting up a foundation for our institutions, but believing that by setting up our institutions, the need will arise and the people will be too committed to back out of it. Similar, I think, when you think about it, Sage mentioned earlier, we moved our capital.
Or planning to. We haven't actually moved it yet. It's not built yet.
But Jokowi was inaugurated in October. And within 2 weeks of his inauguration, he announced that I shall now be moving the capital. It is signed and done, and everyone at least in the ministries, have agreed, and we are going to move it within the next 5 years. Nobody had actually seriously considered moving the capital. It was just a thought experiment that people like to debate on TV and on Parliament, but no one seriously considered it was able to move, 33 to 35 million people living in the greater Jakarta area and its infrastructure and all the business and all the ministries that live there, and sort of transplant that about 800 kilometers away to another island. No one thought it was possible, but then Jokowi just sort of signed it into law and said, we are going to move in the next 5 years, and by 2029, we will have everything built out there. And everyone just sort of went along with it. Within months, everyone agreed. It was like, okay, I guess we're moving the capital. Let me, here are the plans for the new ministry building, and here are the new businesses that are going to be set up there. And somehow we just went along with it.
I mean, it's one thing to say we can move all the infrastructure with if we're just moving the government buildings and we were leaving the Jakarta Stock Exchange and the businesses and the people here. That's one thing. But trying to set up all that infrastructure and all that plan, all the area for it, and are they going to cut down protected rainforest? It seems likely. How many hectares are they going to cut down? And how are they going to get all the infrastructure into an island notorious for having notorious even in here for having poor conditions for building infrastructure in it? Even if we're close to one of the bigger cities, it's still it's up and a ways out the inland.
Yeah. And it was kind of the accepted logic at the time that let's build a capital on an island that's not Java because those islands are not developed yet. So it's sort of that mindset of it's not that's a strategic place to set up a capital, let's build it there. It's more like those areas are not receiving as much money and development as Jakarta and the island of Java is. Let's move the capital there so that other people will not have the choice other than to go to where all the money and all the government and all the politics is going down, and let's just go there.
Right. And that doesn't even begin to start with, well, okay, what's Jakarta going to do in the meantime if you're going to sap the seat of, if you're going to move the seat of power and you're going to sap their selling point dry. God help me, I love Jakarta. I love living in Jakarta. It's not a fun place to visit. It's not a fun place it's not a fun place in most cases to work. It's only a fun place to live because the infrastructure is better. I speak anecdotally, I speak mostly English, and the highest concentration of English speakers outside of Jakarta and Bali is not here. So it's the place I would. It's the place living here that I would live. Without that draw of this is where all the money and power is, we might collapse into a sinkhole, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
We are subsiding into the ocean is the joke there. That's another can of worms, God.
Yeah. And I hope we haven't spent too much time on this capital tangent right now, but maybe that's like sort of like a microcosm for how we think things can get done and how we sort of insist on getting things done, sort of build it and they will come. Even if they don't like it,
even if the procedures don't make sense, even if the principles don't make sense, even if we don't have like built into the national story, here's like the U.S. Despite everything has a national story of like here's how we built things. This is the ideal we're going towards, and even though people disagree on how that works, they do agree that there is an ideal that they should be building towards. And Indonesia is like, congratulations, the UN has declared us sovereign now. Now what? And we've been asking now what since 1950, and I'm not sure we have a competent answer.
That's unfortunately very, very true.
It's a complex picture, and you've painted a lot of detail there for us, but it's not like I think there's a lot of these things where we won't necessarily be able to understand exactly what happened until everything comes out in the wash after the pandemic is over. But equally, it's not surprising, given some of the stuff you've told us, that you're concerned. I mean, everyone is concerned about how their government is reacting to things, I think. Oh, well, I suppose, unless you're in New Zealand, where they seem to have just done everything right.
Or Vietnam.
But I think most people are sat there, saying, oh, our government should have done this, our government should have done that. And I think it's going to be a while until we can really see how everything has worked out. I'm not going to just repeat the points you've made. I think they've been good. Rob, do you have any questions you want to ask at this juncture?
No, nothing to add at this stage. It's been very thorough, very interesting.
Is there anything you two would like to recommend to our listeners? Maybe somewhere where they could get more information as we finish up?
I don't have anything I necessarily want to plug yet, or at least nothing that it isn't entirely too early for me to do so. I mean, I could plug my place of work, but I don't think they sell to the UK. Dan?
If you want additional information, sort of into like the political culture of Indonesia, there is a very, very good episode from the University of Melbourne. It's called Ear to Asia. They do a pretty good breakdown. They go deeper into like the politics of it than we did, and sort of the political climate, but also the political culture. It's a very, very good episode, and they did one on the coronavirus. And so starting back in February, I work for Indonesia in Depth, which is a podcast about Indonesia, which is like a wing of also a political risk consultancy. But right now, I think we're for the past 2 years, we've built a pretty strong base of just content about Indonesia, and you should check it out. We do a bunch of stuff recently about how Indonesia is handling this crisis economically, and we interviewed one of foremost economists in Indonesia who advises the government and goes on panels and stuff. Like I said previously, we also interviewed two very brilliant scientists and doctors about Indonesia's testing regime and how all the different holes we have on that.
From the Eichmann Institute, you said?
Yeah, the Eichmann Institute and Airlangga University, which is from Surabaya.
In East Java.
Yeah, we're currently hard at work on this new episode. It's talking about how whenever we do PCR tests in Indonesia, the genetic data of all the citizens, one is it's not anonymized, and two, it's being kept in a central database by the intelligence and police services. So there's a lot of like ethics going on in there, and when it comes out, it should be really, really good and really, really interesting. So hope you guys will like be interested in that.
Thank you both for joining us. There will be links to those things you mentioned in the show notes. And I suppose there's nothing else for me to say other than thanks to you both. And it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.